You think your kindness will fix them? That if you just show enough patience, enough empathy, enough love, they'll finally soften, they'll understand you, they'll value you, but they don't, and they won't. That's not how this works. One of the most dangerous lies you've been taught, especially if you're a good-hearted person, is that if someone treats you badly, you should respond with even more kindness. That maybe their anger comes from pain, that maybe they just need to be shown what real love looks like. And so you explain yourself calmly when they twist your words, you forgive when they don't apologize, you give them another chance, and then another, until your sense of self is hanging by a thread. But here's the truth. You are not dealing with a normal person. You're dealing with someone who sees your niceness not as compassion, but as an opportunity. A narcissist doesn't think like you do. That's the first and most important realization. You believe in mutual respect, fairness, understanding. They believe in power, in control, in winning. When you're kind, they don't see someone admirable. They see someone weak. They see someone they can manipulate, someone they can push a little harder, someone they can shape into what they need you to be: compliant, apologetic, submissive. Maybe you're nodding right now because you've seen it play out. You raised a concern, something small, something real, and instead of addressing it, they turned it around on you. Suddenly you're the villain. Suddenly they're the victim, and you find yourself saying, sorry, just to keep the peace. Again, you thought if you were calm enough, rational enough, forgiving enough, things would get better, but they didn't. They got worse. Because narcissists don't play by the same rules. They don't want peace. They want control. And every time you hand them your kindness without discernment, they collect it like currency, and they use it against you. You've been trained by culture, by religion, by family maybe, to always take the high road, be the bigger person they told you. But no one told you what to do when the person you're being bigger for is digging a hole underneath you. Here's what you need to understand. Being nice is not always good. In fact, sometimes it's dangerous. Narcissists don't respond to niceness. They exploit it. They don't feel guilt the way you do. They don't reflect the way you do. They don't love the way you do. And this is not to make you bitter. This is to wake you up, because the very traits that make you a good person, your empathy, your loyalty, your patience, are the exact things a narcissist looks for in a target. Not because they admire those qualities, but because they can use. If you're the kind of person who always gives the benefit of the doubt, who tries to see the best in people, who avoids conflict, you are exactly what a narcissist wants. Not because they'll love you, but because they can control you. You think your silence during arguments will calm things down. It won't. You think walking on eggshells will prevent another explosion. It won't. You think giving them time will lead to healing. It won't. What it will do is teach them that they can treat you however they want, and before you know it, you're shrinking. You're changing how you talk. You're filtering your words. You're losing your confidence, and you're still trying to be nice. But it's not working, because you're trying to build a bridge with someone who sees bridges as opportunities to You're trying to reason with someone who twists reason. You're trying to love someone who uses love as leverage. And that's the trap. This isn't about being rude. This isn't about fighting fire with fire. It's about understanding that with a narcissist, your job is not to be nice. It's to be clear. It's to be strong. It's to be unavailable to their manipulation. Kindness without boundaries is self-destruction. There's a difference between compassion and compliance, between love and self-betrayal, between forgiveness and enabling. If you've been conditioned to always be nice, ask yourself this: at what cost? How many apologies have you given just to be heard? How many truths have you buried to keep the peace? How many times have you twisted yourself to avoid setting them off? And what did it give you? Real connection, real love, real peace? Or did it just buy you another day of survival? It's not your fault that you were taught to meet cruelty with kindness, but it becomes your responsibility to unlearn that pattern once you see where it leads, because nice doesn't work with narcissists. Not because niceness is wrong, but because narcissists weaponize it. They don't want mutual respect. They want emotional leverage. They don't want your truth. They want your obedience. They don't want you. They want to control you. So the next time you're tempted to explain yourself one more time, to forgive the unforgivable, to give them the benefit of the doubt again, pause, ask yourself, am I doing this out of strength or fear, because fear wears many disguises. It can sound like politeness. It can look like patience. It can feel like forgiveness. But if it's rooted in avoiding conflict, avoiding abandonment, avoiding guilt, it's not real kindness. It's self-protection disguised as virtue. And that's what narcissists count on, that you won't notice the difference, but you're noticing now, and that's where everything starts to change. You keep hoping that one day they'll understand you, that one conversation will finally get through, that if you can just find the right words, if you can stay calm enough, if you can explain things clearly enough, they'll wake up, they'll reflect, they'll change, but they won't. And the reason is simple. They're not playing the same game you are. See, most people walk into a disagreement assuming there's a shared goal resolution. We believe that if we both speak honestly, listen with respect, and try to understand each other, we'll find common ground. We'll reach clarity and things will improve. But that's not how a narcissist thinks. That's not the game they're playing. Their goal isn't truth. It's not fairness. It's not healing. It's power. Once you understand that, everything starts to make sense. All the confusion, the chaos, the emotional ups and downs, they're not random. They're not accidents. They're tactics. And the person using them knows exactly what they're doing. To a narcissist, your emotions are tools. If they can make you feel small, ashamed, confused, desperate, then they win. Not because they proved anything, not because they were right, but because they pulled you into their world and bent you to their will. You think it's a conversation, they think it's a contest. You think it's about resolving a problem, they think it's about winning the moment. That's why they interrupt. That's why they twist your words. That's why they bring up things from the past that have nothing to do with the current issue. That's why they project, accusing you of the very things they themselves are doing. Because the goal isn't to understand, it's to destabilize you. Control through confusion. It's subtle at first. You bring up something that bothered you, a normal person might say, okay, I hear you, let's talk about it. But the narcissist, they'll deflect. They'll get offended. They'll bring up something you did 3 weeks ago. They'll twist the narrative so now you're defending yourself. And before you even realize it, the original issue is gone, buried under a mess of emotional manipulation. And here's the painful part. The more reasonable you are, the more they twist it. The more calmly you explain yourself, the more they use your words against you. Because narcissists are not operating in the realm of truth. They operate in the realm of dominance. They lie not because they're confused, but because lies give them control. They gaslight, not because they forget what happened, but because making you forget gives them power. They shift blame, not because they can't take responsibility, but because blame keeps you off balance and them in charge. This is not confusion. This is strategy. And until you stop expecting them to act like a healthy person, you will stay stuck in a game you can't win. See, healthy people argue to solve problems. Narcissists argue to gain leverage. Healthy people want mutual understanding. Narcissists want emotional obedience. And here's the worst part. They don't just want you to agree with them. They want you to doubt yourself. They want you to question your reality. Because once you do, they own you. That's how they keep control. And it's not always loud. Sometimes it's subtle. A passive-aggressive comment. A backhanded compliment. A raised eyebrow that makes you feel small. Narcissists are masters of psychological warfare. And most of the time, they don't have to raise their voice to control the room. They just plant seeds of self-doubt and let you tear yourself apart. But here's what really traps you. They don't only hurt you, they also reward you just enough. That's what makes it so confusing. One moment, they're cruel, cold, condescending. The next, they're charming, affectionate, sweet. It's like two different people, and you start chasing that nice version, thinking if you can just behave the right way, you'll unlock it again. But that's not love. That's intermittent reinforcement. And it's the same psychological principle that fuels gambling addiction. If someone is cruel all the time, your brain eventually detaches. But if they mix cruelty with sudden bursts of affection, your brain gets hooked. It starts believing that maybe, just maybe, this time you'll get it right. This time they'll treat you well. That maybe is how they control you. And you have to understand this. They are doing it on purpose. Because here's the real cruelty. The kindness was never real. It was a tool. A way to keep you emotionally invested, a way to keep you doubting yourself, a way to make sure you never walk away. You thought they were just complicated. You thought they had a tough past. You thought if you were patient, kind, supportive, you could help them grow. but they don't want to grow. They want to win. And if that means breaking you down piece by piece, they'll do it. So what's the answer? Stop arguing with someone who doesn't care about truth. Stop trying to prove your worth to someone who already decided you exist to serve their ego. Because you've seen the pattern. You've felt the cycle. You've tried everything you could think of, reasoning, kindness, explanation, patience, and none of it worked. Now what? You'll stop focusing on changing the narcissist, and you start changing yourself. Not because you're the problem, but because that's where your power is. You start building something far more valuable than their approval. You start building psychological armor. Understand this. A narcissist doesn't destroy you with fists or violence. They do it with confusion, with guilt, with emotional traps, so subtle that by the time you realize what's happening, you're already deep inside their web. And once you see that, your first job is not to fight back. It's to detach, not with anger, not with revenge, with clarity. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you stop letting them control what you feel. You stop dancing to their tune. Because here's the truth most people don't want to hear. They feed off your reactions. Every time you defend yourself, they gain control. Every time you cry, they know they still have power. Every time you break your boundary just this once, they tighten their grip. And they're not just looking for conflict. Some narcissists thrive on positive reactions too. Compliments, apologies, affection. It doesn't matter. Any emotional response is fuel to them because it tells them they still matter enough to provoke something in you. So what's the move? You stop giving them the one thing they need to keep manipulating you, your emotional energy. This is where you learn the art of non-reaction. You hear the insult, but you don't internalize. You see the bait, but you don't bite. You recognize the pattern, and instead of stepping into it, you step back. Not because you're weak, but because you finally become strong enough to walk away from what doesn't serve you. That's what psychological armor looks like. It's not cold. It's not cruel. It's clear. It's calm. It's powerful. And it starts with a single mindset shift. You don't owe anyone access to your peace, not because they're family, not because they're a partner, not because they used to be different. You get to decide who enters your space, who influences your emotions, who shapes your reality. And when someone consistently violates that, they lose access. That's not cruelty. That's self-respect. Now let's talk about one of the most powerful tools you can use in this process, gray rocking. What is it? It's a psychological technique where you make yourself as boring, flat, and unresponsive as possible to the narcissist. You don't give them the fire they want. You don't explain. You don't argue. You don't cry. You don't react. You become dull, emotionally and energetically. To a narcissist, this is torture. Because if they can't provoke you, they can't control you. So when they say something cruel, you don't flinch. When they bait you into a fight, you don't bite. When they guilt trip, you stay neutral. You stop being a player in their game. You become a gray rock, solid, unmovable, unshakable. And yes, it will drive them crazy. Because you're breaking the rules. You're not reacting the way you used to. You're no longer giving them the payoff they're used to. You're taking back the one thing they need most, your emotional availability. But understand this, it's not easy. It's hard to stay calm when they lie about you. It's hard to stay grounded when they twist your words. It's hard to walk away when every part of you wants to make them understand. But this isn't about them anymore. This is about discipline. This is about emotional maturity. This is about protecting your identity from someone who only sees you as a tool for their ego. So when they escalate, and they will, you don't match their chaos. You rise above it. You let your stillness speak louder than their drama. You let your silence set boundaries they can't cross. And when they realize they can't move you anymore, not with rage, not with guilt, not with praise, they start to lose interest. Because narcissists don't stick around where they can't dominate. That's why emotional detachment isn't just a defense. It's an escape. It's the beginning of your freedom. And here's something else you need to hear. You are allowed to choose peace over explanation. You don't have to win the argument. You win the moment you stop needing their validation to feel whole. You win the moment you stop letting their behavior define your response. And when you start living from that place of inner discipline, something incredible happens. Your self-worth returns because it was never lost. It was just buried under their lies, their manipulation, their emotional games. Now you see it again, and you protect it like your life depends on it, because in many ways it does. Not physically, psychologically, because the longer you let someone else control your inner world, the more lost you become. But the moment you take that power back, The moment you stop explaining, stop defending, stop reacting, you begin to reclaim yourself. And let's be clear, this isn't a one-time decision. It's a daily practice. You will have days where you slip, where the urge to explain, to react, to argue creeps in. That's okay. It's part of the process. What matters is that you come back to center. You remember your power. Because you don't beat a narcissist by out-arguing them. You beat them by becoming immune to their games. And that immunity comes from emotional self-control, from silence, from detachment, from the discipline of saying, I see what you're doing, I'm just not playing anymore. That's armor. That's strength. That's the beginning of freedom. We've heard this advice before, set boundaries. And maybe you have. You've said things like, I don't like when you talk to me that way. I won't tolerate being lied to. If this happens again, I'm walking away. But did you follow through? Because here's the truth. Most people don't want to face a boundary without action is just a suggestion. And narcissists don't take suggestions. They test limits, they poke, they prod, they push until you break. Because they're not interested in understanding your boundaries. They're interested in finding your breaking point. To a narcissist, your boundary is a challenge, a puzzle, a wall to climb over. And the moment you set one, they begin calculating how to make you bend it. Not because they need to, but because it proves something to them. It proves they still have power. So when you say, don't yell at me like that, and then stay in the room, they take note. When you say, I won't respond to insults, and then start defending yourself, they notice. When you say, if you lie to me again, I'm done, and then stay anyway, they win. Because to a narcissist, every broken boundary is confirmation that they still control you. That's why setting a boundary isn't the hard part. Enforcing it is. And enforcement requires two things, consequences and consistency. You say, don't talk to me like that, then leave the room when they do. You say, I'm not repeating myself, then go silent when they bait you. You say, I won't be manipulated anymore, then cut the rope when the guilt trip begins. And yes, it's hard, because enforcement comes with discomfort. They'll accuse you of being cold. They'll guilt you with, I guess you don't care anymore. They'll play the victim, I'm the one trying. You're just giving up. Why? Because boundaries scare them. They fear anything that limits their control. They fear anything that says, I belong to myself now. So they push harder, they escalate. This is what psychologists call the extinction burst. That moment when their usual manipulation stops working and they panic. If they used guilt, now they use threats. If they used charm, now they use rage. If they used victimhood, now they use blame. This is the storm before the silence. And it's exactly where most people break. Because it feels brutal. It feels unfair. You'll hear things like, you're selfish, you've changed, you're the narcissist now. And if you're not ready, you'll doubt yourself. You'll second guess your decision. You'll want to explain one last time just to prove you're not the bad guy. Don't. Because the moment you go back to explaining yourself, you've already lost. You're back in their game. You're on their field, and they're holding the scoreboard. Let me say this clearly. You don't have to explain your boundaries to someone who violates them. You don't need a debate. You don't need their understanding. You don't need their permission. You need action. Because narcissists don't learn through conversation. They learn through consequence. Not because they respect you, but because they realize their tactics no longer work. And once something stops working, they drop it. So how do you enforce boundaries effectively? Start with absolute clarity. Don't set 10 rules. Set 1 or 2 hard lines and stick to them without exception. For example, if you yell at me, I will end the conversation. You're not trying to teach them to be better. You're showing them that you will no longer abandon yourself to keep the peace. And here's the real test of your strength. What will you do when they test you? Because they will. Not once, not twice, but over and over, until they're absolutely sure you mean what you say. So the first few times you enforce a boundary, expect backlash, expect confusion, expect emotional chaos. That's the detox. That's the resistance that comes when you remove their access to your emotion. But if you hold the line, something incredible happens. You stop flinching, you stop reacting, you stop fearing their disapproval, and in that silence, you regain yourself. You've spent too long trying to be understood by someone who was never listening. You've begged for fairness from someone who doesn't believe in it. You've chased closure, thinking that if they would just admit what they did, just apologize once, you could finally move on. But the apology isn't coming. And the closure, it's not something they give, it's something you create. Because here's the truth, a narcissist doesn't give you closure, they give you confusion. They give you half-truths and mixed signals. They give you false hope only to take it away. They give you silence when you need answers and accusations when you speak your truth. And all this time, you've believed that maybe, just maybe, if you could explain it right, they would see it. But they don't want to see it, because seeing the truth would mean taking responsibility. It would mean losing control. It would mean confronting the damage they've done. And narcissists don't do that. They rewrite reality instead. They pretend, they project, they blame, they distort. And if you're not careful, you start to live in their version of reality, questioning your memory, your worth, your voice. So let me say this as clearly as I can. You don't need their apology to heal. You don't need their acknowledgement to move on. You don't need their recognition to feel worthy, because your healing is not dependent on their behavior. It's dependent on your decision. The decision to stop waiting, the decision to stop explaining, the decision to stop needing validation from someone who was never capable of seeing you. The most radical act of healing you can choose is this: to stop needing them to set you free and set yourself free instead. Because every time you wait for their approval, you hand them power. Every time you go back for closure, you reopen a wound. Every time you hope they'll change, you put your peace on hold. And you've waited long enough. You've exhausted yourself trying to be enough for someone who was never satisfied. You've bent over backward to earn respect from someone who only respected control. You've explained your heart to someone who saw it as leverage, not as love. And now it's time to take your heart back. Not with bitterness, not with rage, with reality. The reality that they are who they are, and that their inability to love you wasn't a reflection of your value. It was a reflection of their limitation. They didn't ignore you because you were small. They ignored you because they were empty. They didn't lie because you couldn't handle the truth. They lied because they couldn't face it. And the moment you realize that, the story starts to shift. You're no longer the victim hoping for justice. You're the author, closing the chapter on a lie, because healing from narcissistic abuse isn't about proving them wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you don't need to play their game to win. And the game always ends the same way. They distort. You defend. They manipulate. You justify. They withdraw. You chase. But what happens when you stop chasing? What happens when you say, I no longer need you to see me, because I finally see myself? That's when the power shifts. That's when the dynamic collapses. That's when they lose control and you gain your freedom. Not just physical freedom, emotional freedom. The freedom to live without waiting for their reaction. The freedom to speak without fear of being twisted. The freedom to exist without shrinking yourself to keep the peace. That's what you're fighting for. You're not just breaking contact. You're breaking the illusion that your worth is tied to their opinion, because it never was. You were always enough. You were always worthy. You were always strong. But when you're trapped in a relationship with a narcissist, you start to forget. You forget who you were before the gaslighting, the guilt, the cycles. Now it's time to remember. It's time to remember that your peace is sacred, that your mind is yours, that your emotions don't belong to them, and that you don't need their apology to walk away with your head held high, because the final form of self-respect is letting go of people who refuse to grow. You don't need to scream. You don't need to slam doors. You don't need to make them see. You just need to walk quietly, clearly, powerfully, because the narcissist's biggest fear isn't your anger, it's your indifference. When you stop reacting, they lose control. When you stop chasing, they lose power. When you stop explaining, they lose access. And in that moment, the moment you detach, you don't just escape them. You reclaim yourself. So don't wait for them to change. Don't wait for the conversation that will never come. Don't wait for the closure that will never arrive. Make your own closure. They will never give me what I need, and that's okay, because I can give it to myself. That's the mantra. That's the shift. That's the end of their story and the beginning of yours. Because in the end, the greatest revenge is not anger. It's healing. It's peace. It's independent. It's a life so full and unshakable that they become nothing more than a distant echo. You don't just survive this. You rise,